stream conversations where we encourage by giving you tools for powerful living and hope for life in this pandemic and trying times. Today in our live stream, we're going to be talking about protest versus progress. Right now, I'm going to kick it over to Myra and let her introduce our first guest. And then later at 7:30, Commissioner Natalie Hall will be joining us to further the conversation. Myra?
Thank you, Taylor. So, as Taylor mentioned, this topic is called Protest versus Progress. And we wanted to be able to provide you all just an open conversation about what's going on in our world today as we see people protesting and just the social unrest that we're experiencing as a nation, quite frankly. Um, and sometimes you may feel powerless. And so we want to make sure that by the end of this conversation, we provide you with the tools and equip you with ideas and resources to feel a little bit more empowered than you may feel right now. So today's guest, we have both Dr. Curtis Jasper, who is a mental and emotional wellness expert, as well as Taylor mentioned, we have Commissioner, Fulton County Commissioner Natalie Hall of District 4, who'll be joining us halfway through at about 7:30. So please stay tuned. You definitely don't want to miss this amazing conversation that we're going to have today. So without further ado, we're going to jump into this conversation with our first guest, Dr. Curtis Jasper. Welcome, Dr. Jasper.
Thank you so much for having me. How you guys doing today?
Doing,
Doing well.
doing good, Dr.
Glad to
Jasper.
be here.
Yes, thank you for being here. We're going to jump right in and just ask you to tell the audience a little bit about what your role is. I mentioned you're a mental and emotional wellness expert, and I also learned that you do this in a non-colonized way. And I don't know if I said that correctly, but can you tell us what your role is and that and what that actually means? How do you provide, social and mental wellness strategies and practices to your group of people?
Right. So essentially, I provide counseling and therapy for individuals, groups, as well as couples. I stole the uncolonized way from one of my colleagues who, and it's just my way of denouncing traditional westernized mental health approaches, blanket approaches to people, specifically people of color and Black people. And so I unapologetically use that term because it is my knowingness that we, as mental health advocates and professionals, we can assist people without diagnosis, without a psychoanalysis. We can assist people by giving them tools, many of which we're going to share here, without assigning labels to them, particularly for our children. Many of the children whom I visit with, they already come to me with labels from the educational system. I'm a former teacher as well as a principal, so I know that game really, really well. So in addition to a lot of our babies who have been stigmatized with labels in the public education, they go right into therapy with more of the same, right? And oftentimes they go right on the streets and get caught up, unfortunately, into outside agencies like the criminal justice system. And then there's more labels. So it is my number one commitment to assist people more from a psychosocial educational standpoint than a therapeutic clinical standpoint, as if I'm fixing someone who needs to be fixed. And that's why I unapologetically use the term uncolonized.
Love that. Love that. So, Dr. Jasper, in the work that you do, I'd love to ask you, what have you experienced in Atlanta specifically, and why do you believe people are protesting?
So right around the corner from my house, I've experienced tanks and armed guards
Wow.
and,
Wow.
and protest. I mean, literally in protest, as well as rioting. I have experienced the majority of the people, let me be clear, the majority of the people actually protesting, which is
Mhm.
our fundamental right.
Mhm.
There's a small group of people who are rioting, and no judgment here, Uh, but overall, protest has been very effective, from unions to passing laws. So I have personally experienced tanks and armed guards, also destruction from businesses uh, and businesses closing, streets being blocked off, police sirens racing up and down Peachtree. Um, but those are the things I've actually eyewitnessed. Of course, there's a plethora of things online and media. I won't add to that because I know we're all aware of it. But my personal experience is that the majority of the people are peacefully protesting from my personal experience. But there is some rioting going on as well.
That is a great way to put it. The protest versus the rioting, because we, wanted to have this conversation as an open conversation, because people have different opinions around protesting, whether it's effective, rioting, why people riot, and they denounce it. It's honestly been taking up so much time in social media, on the mainstream media around the riots, that I sometimes wonder if the message around why these protests even starts to get lost. And we don't want that. We want to make sure that the protests are effective and that people know why they're protesting,
Mhm.
and that at the end of the day, that leads to progress. And that's really, the crux of this topic today, to make sure that we're not just protesting, but that we're doing it effectively. I want to read a piece of a letter that Barack Obama recently wrote around protests, and just kind of get your thoughts on it. He says the point of protest is to raise public awareness, to put a spotlight on injustice, and to make the powers that be uncomfortable. In fact, throughout American history, it's often only been in response to protest and civil disobedience that the political system has even paid attention to marginalized communities. But eventually, aspirations have to be translated into specific laws and institutional practices. And in a democracy, that only happens when we elect government officials who are responsive to our demands. So, Dr. Jasper, you brought up a good point that these protests, you don't condemn them. They are effective, they are necessary. Um, and we understand that this unrest isn't new. We've been dealing with these types of issues for decades. How do we continue to fight for something that almost seems sometimes that it's unattainable and we're already exhausted?
Well, we know we have no choice but to continue to fight. The question is how. In response to exhaustion, we have to rest. We have to continue to go as we rest. We have to make forward progress and rest, forward progress and rest. There is no option to stop. But I want to go back to something you said regarding the idea of a protest in and of itself. And I want us to be clear that protest is on a basic level is a statement or action expressing disapproval, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a number of ways to actually protest. Marching in the street is just one. There are ways to protest with our dollars, economic
Yes.
protests, obviously non-active participation, meaning removing ourselves from certain activities. So there's a protest is what we do before the actual test. We are proponents of the real test. We are getting prepared to put in a series of action and sustainable goals and objectives, right? That's the goal, to bring awareness to it. But then there's this piece of rebellion, and that sort of puts in the rage component because the rebellion is the open, active resistance of authority, right? Which, again, depending on how you look at it, that's still within our scope. You must rebel. You must actively, openly resist things like racial injustice. We don't have a choice with that, right? We must actively. So what we're doing is we are rebelling within a protest. Now, the rage component adds to the rioting.
Yes.
And in it, right, that's the part though. So the rage component actually takes a rebellious protest in and of itself into a riot where it becomes destructive. All right. So the thing about the statement you read from former President Barack Obama, I I agree with that 99.9%. The only addition I'd like to add is starting with local government.
Yeah.
Yeah, the federal government is one thing.
Yeah.
We're talking local government. We're talking county,
Yeah.
school board, police commissioner, mayor, city council, local, the governing body that directly impacts us immediately. For example, right around the corner. So that's the part that we must not only become involved, but educate everybody from our seniors down to our children. We must become literate with the local politics in our immediate areas.
I think that's extraordinary. I couldn't agree with you more. And if you read further in Barack Obama's article, he definitely gets into how we are to participate in our governments at a local level. But taking this back to probably somewhere where I know, because I've personally experienced you, you can really speak to. Um, there has been no other community of people that has experienced the legacy of brutality and injustice like the African American community or Black community. How do you recommend we begin healing from this so that we possibly can move forward as a people?
So the first we got to be clear of how we convey these messages even to ourselves. It is a part of our experiences, but we will not claim it as part of our legacy.
Hmm.
Let's be clear. We will not claim this as part of our legacy. We have legacies long before we arrived on these shores. And that's part of the disconnect is that we don't, all of us are not privy to the legacy, which has us thinking that racial injustice, which did not start in this decade or the last two or three,
Exactly.
but in fact, the last couple of centuries,
Mhm.
right? And so, one of the things that we must do as seasoned adults is to make sure that the youth are clear about this not being a part of our legacy,
Hmm.
first and foremost. Um, Again, how do we start to heal? Healing is a practice. And one of the things that, right, it's not a place of arrival.
Hmm.
Healing is a recovering journey, right?
Right.
So you don't cure diabetes and then go back to doing what you did that caused it, right? You continue on that road of recovery until you transform. And so, as such, we have to uh, sit in the knowingness that our healing is a practice and that it starts with us as individuals. It starts with us as families, obviously moving out to extended family community, whether that's church, social organizations, and even political organizations. But healing is a practice. And if we look at it that way, we won't necessarily put the pressure on anybody individually
Hmm.
as if you're sick, you need to heal. No, if you're sick and you get well, your healing still becomes a way of life. And so, in that sense, we don't have an option to not move forward. The question is how?
Yeah, yeah. And that's a perfect question because I do feel like I mentioned, earlier that it's exhausting. This is draining, emotionally draining. And if you think about it, our country is already dealing with trauma with COVID-19. We're dealing with a situation that, mentally, emotionally, sometimes we don't even know how it impacts us. I'd like to think of it as we're all grieving and we go through different stages of grief.
Yes, that's true.
And as that that healing process that you reference, it comes from pain. So even with this pain, even during this time of grievance, how do we channel it into something more positive? Like, what are some maybe strategies or tactics that you would offer, as a mental wellness expert, that would help us channel this pain into something positive?
Good. So there's before I give clear examples, I want to point out just what you said that the stages of grief, there's this sixth stage. Most people are familiar with five stages of grief, and they are not in succession. But there's this sixth stage that's not mentioned, and that's meaning.
Hmm.
And so we take all that we've been through, the anger, the resentment, the denial, and we come to the sixth stage of our grieving process that's called meaning. So how do we take all of the previous 5 steps and make this mean what we need it to make us uh, sustain our progress moving towards that? And some of the clear steps that we can take is more of what we're doing now.
Yeah.
I mean, not just discussions for the sake of discussions, but bringing on a a variety of people who have different angles of this, different perspectives of this aerial view, so that they can share their areas of expertise, their vantage point, and their lived experiences. Let's
Wow.
not discount that. And so, group discussions, obviously, there's an educational piece, but the mental health wellness piece, there's a soothing piece that we need
Hmm.
in addition to the church. There's a soothing piece, and it doesn't always have to go into medical slash mental health for us to put in situations and opportunities for us to stay soothing, meaning we heal and mourn and grieve as we continue to make forward progress. And that takes solidarity, that takes unity, that takes community, right? But group discussions, on the basic level, we all need some type of therapy.
Hmm.
So most of us are familiar with therapy when things get out of hand. We need
Yeah.
therapy as a way of life for maintenance, like we have dental appointments, like you check in with your accountant every quarter before the taxes, like you check in with your doctor for your physical. We don't have to wait until the symptoms become unbearable to say you need to go see a therapist. And so that needs to become a way of life, whether that's family, group, individual, or couples therapy, just as one. The other thing is this mentoring piece that this has been my thing, this mentoring piece that's critical,
Yeah.
that I think is critical, that all of us in one form or another have benefited from. We have all benefited from mentoring. And I know people who have had mentors, from exclusive mentors professionally to uncles and aunts who have been mentors, to baseball and basketball coaches who have been mentors. But this notion that we had mentors back in the day and we don't need them now, even at 49, is
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah.
We need mentors, therapists, family, love,
I like
connection
that.
as part of our healing journey. Because keep in mind, healing is a practice, it is no arrival.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's
I like
powerful.
that mentoring piece, how that is a part of the practice. And it's something that is definitely, that's done, like through obviously national organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs and stuff like that. But it needs to be a bigger part of what we do inside our
Yeah.
communities, especially inside our churches.
Being intentional
Yeah,
about it.
being
Yeah.
intentional about that. Speaking of Commissioner Hall is ready to join us. We're going to bring her in at this time, and Commissioner Hall is going to add another element to this conversation. That was what this was all about, bringing a political governing type
Yes.
of element in the commissioner, as well as a mental health element and wellness element with Dr. Jasper. Commissioner Hall, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Welcome.
I know you're really busy, especially in this time. So it means a lot to us that you took time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today. I'd love to just give you the floor and just understand about your platform and what you're doing in this time.
Well, first, I just want to thank all of you for inviting me on to speak on the topic of the protest, how we can help as elected officials, and to also speak on my platform. As you know, we are in an election season. Early voting is happening across Atlanta and Fulton County right now until Friday, June 4th. And on June 9th, I'm sorry, June 5th. And then on June 9th, which is Tuesday of next week, it is election day. And I am running for reelection. I have done so much work, I would take up your whole show if I started talking about it. So I'll just highlight some things that are important, such as homelessness and housing, affordable housing. I created resolutions and also requested funding in those areas so that we can address the need to provide services and programs for the homeless. I also created a task force for pre-arrest diversion to address the fact that we are arresting the homeless instead of providing them with what they need as far as mental and behavioral health services, which is a division that we have at Fulton County. And we also have a homeless division that provides housing and food and helps people stay who are one paycheck away from being homeless, stay in their apartments in their homes by providing rent and mortgage and utility assistance. So we have a lot of services that are human service related. As you may know, we are mandated by the state to provide health and human services. So we also have senior services. We provide in-home delivered meals, light cleaning services, transportation to include Uber and Lyft. Seniors can ride for $1 each way using Uber and Lyft. Yes, I see you. And we have our senior centers. We have two. We have multi-purpose facilities, which have additional services like the aquatic pool for therapy and a lot of wonderful classes, computer classes, dance, exercise. They go on field trips and everything. They eat breakfast and lunch. And we have senior centers across our county. I asked for over $1.2 million to enhance those services because, as you know, across America, the senior population is the fastest growing population. And now when I say that, I have to I have to revert back to COVID-19 because COVID-19 was really trying to take out our seniors in the
Yeah.
beginning. They were the most vulnerable population, and were told to shelter in place first because they were more susceptible to getting COVID-19, and we really had to take care of them. I also have done a lot with workforce development and job training and resume writing. We have a large population that is in need of jobs, especially
Yes.
now after COVID-19. So many people were furloughed and laid off. I was reading an article that said we're almost at 50% of our population being unemployed.
Mm,
And that sounds like the depression days. It's
mm,
really bad. And with the food lines and everything, I really feel like we're living in a current day depression.
mm.
But Fulton County, because we serve the people, we actually allocated $10 million to fund our nonprofit partners to help us with testing, rent, mortgage, utility assistance, food delivery assistance for free to our constituents who need it. And we have some great nonprofit partners. But normally, Fulton County provides grant funding to nonprofit organizations. We provide up to $100,000 to nonprofits that do any type of work with youth, seniors, the disabled, poverty, and and I'm missing one, disabilities.
Disability.
And so anyone that has a nonprofit that does work in any of those five areas can apply during the fall months. And we provide up to $100,000 of funding. And we also do the same in the arts and culture and film and entertainment industry space. Those nonprofits can get up to $50,000 through what we call our contract for services grant funding. So this is just what we normally do in a lot of in Fulton County. And also, we had a situation a little while ago where four of our commissioners thought it was a good idea to relinquish our entitlement community status with HUD and send back millions of dollars of HUD funding. And I just could not stand by and watch that. So I did a call for action to community. Over 200 of our residents showed up to our televised Board of Commissioners meeting in March, and they let the commissioners know that that was not a good idea. Over 117 spoke, which broke a record in Fulton County. I'm so proud of my constituents for standing up because this is something that we need to do on a regular basis. This is why we the protest. Our young people are feeling like they are unheard.
Yep.
They're afraid. They're fearful. They're angry. They're upset, and they feel like no one's listening to them. This is why we saw the uprising.
Hmm.
They they literally went to the streets to show us how they felt, and that's why when you walk through downtown Buckhead and all these areas, you see the devastation. The devastation is a visual of how they feel
Mm.
inside. And I think that it's an awakening for all of us who have leadership roles, the elected officials like myself, business leaders, community and neighborhood leaders. It is time for us to wake up and listen and act. And I'm so proud of our state legislators, Part Cannon, Erica Thomas, Senator Nakima Williams, even on the local level, our city council member, Antonio Brown. They all came together on Sunday and we did a press conference about the protest. And they have actually written two House bills, House Bill 636 and 426, one for hate crimes and the other one for excessive force.
Yes.
And we are calling for a database to be created because the officer who killed, and I do say killed because he murdered George Floyd,
Yeah.
Yes.
he had 18 infractions, 18 complaints
I
against him.
heard.
How does the officer
Yes.
get that many complaints and
Yes.
there has been no discipline, no termination, no nothing?
Absolutely.
We have to start keeping track of this. And they call for a database to be created to put those type of accounts into the
And
database
hold them
under that
accountable.
officer's name. And so we can literally keep track of what's going on and start calling for action. And I think it's a great idea. So we need our citizens to come out to these elected meetings for the Board of Commissioners in Fulton County, City of Atlanta City Council meetings, State of Georgia when they are in assembly, and actually speak to your elected officials. Get on the microphone, on the television, on the video, and be heard. And it will get their attention and move them to act. I'm
Well,
sorry.
no, no,
I'm
that
sorry.
was that was
I can get on a tangent.
no, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. In particular, the last part, as you talked about the database and so on and so forth. So I have a couple of things for you. The first thing is what is the resource where people can find out about these meetings where they could speak to their elected officials so that I can do my part in letting the congregation here at Tabernacle Baptist Church know about it and all of my colleagues around the city so that we could get more people into these meetings so that the elected officials on a local level can get a piece of how we feel and what we want. So how do we find out about these meetings, and so that we can encourage our congregations and our extended community to go?
For Fulton County, you can actually go to fultoncountyga.gov and click on Board of Commissioners, and you'll see our meetings. You can actually watch the archive of our meetings, and it will tell you about upcoming live meetings. We meet on the first and third Wednesday of every month, starting at 10 a.m., and we have a public comment section where the public can speak and ask questions and address whatever they need to directly to all seven commissioners. And I always encourage people to sign up for our public comment and say something. Let us know how you want to see your taxpayers' dollars spent. Let us know what you need in your communities and your families, because that's what we're there to do. Um, I used to work at the city for 12 years, managing all 6,000 of their computers at over 200 facilities. I was an IT manager. And so over on the city side, you can actually go to atlantagA.gov and go to their website for the city council, and you can find out about their city council meetings. They have a lot more meetings that are really in depth. They have committees where the council people are appointed to a committee that oversees a specific area of government, such as public safety or water sewer, in so many different areas. So they have a lot of meetings that you would need to follow.
Okay, so we can go to the commissioner's webpage, and you can go to the City of Atlanta's webpage to get information about these functions. Well, it seems like we have lost the commissioner. We'll give her a chance to come back. But while she's on the way back,
Oh, hey, there we go.
okay, okay, there we go.
Okay, I think I just came back.
You did. You're not
Can
on
you
your?
guys see me?
We can see you. Are you on your Wi-Fi and not on your hotspot?
Am
Okay.
I on the Wi-Fi?
Yeah, just make sure you're on your Wi-Fi and not on
Yes,
hotspot.
I'm on Wi-Fi.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm on the Wi-Fi now, not on the hotspot anymore.
Okay, cool.
But it did go out. Can you see me and hear me now?
We can see you, but your
Yep,
signal's a little.
that's okay. You
It's
want to
choppy.
let's
Yeah.
jump over to Jasper maybe while
Yeah.
Dr. Jasper while that comes together. Um, Dr. Jasper, we talked a little bit, and thank you, Commissioner, for just kind of explaining how sometimes we don't feel heard. And Dr. Commissioner was explaining that
Network.
sometimes people,
10:52 minutes connected.
they go through social unrest and feelings of rage and protest because they don't feel
Hold on
heard.
now. Let me do
So,
something real quick
is
because while you're
there
doing all
any
of that,
maybe offerings that you would offer in terms of resources or things that people of the Black community can do and engage in to feel that they're heard, really tying back to that meaning, that sixth level of grief that you were explaining? How do we find meaning in all of this?
So I lost the initial part of your question just through some technical things. So how do, I'll do my best to make sure that I
Okay, and I can
grasp
clarify.
that. How do we make meaning of all this? Was that the question?
Absolutely. And I was saying that Commissioner Hall was explaining that people don't feel heard, especially the youth. And sometimes we don't feel that voting is important or that voting even matters. It's this feeling of not having power. And you earlier said it, that meaning, trying to find meaning in all of this. How do we find that power? How do we find that meaning? How do we even feel important during all of this? How do we tie that together to feel like we have some meaning and some purpose?
Right. So as humans, we all know that we have an undeniable need to be seen, felt, and heard.
Yeah.
And so what's critical is that we not just come together, but stay together. See, the love ain't got to be perfect. It just got to be true and real, right? And so just the coming together in solidarity is first and foremost, right? And so oftentimes there's a disconnect between generations or amongst generations, I should say.
Hmm.
Young people are inundated with things that we weren't when we
Yes.
were their age. And so the distraction level is different, not necessarily bad or good, but different. How do we make meaning of it? We involve all generations in all organizations. I personally think that it is a huge disgrace to have any organization, politics, social, community, without having each generation represented, particularly in the Black community. No exceptions,
Wow.
right? So that we can have that ongoing input, that ongoing perspective from a young person. Like then they can be heard. Right. Of course, they're going to exhibit rage and rebellion through protest that is labeled as rioting when they feel that they are unheard.
Yes.
But part of that is there is no significant relationship, oftentimes, that is built between generations. There's a bunch of organizations that are doing very well. I can name a couple in particular. One that I'm working with is Next Level Boys Academy, which is a mentoring organization for young men here in the Atlanta area. And they do phenomenal work. I mean, they go all the way from mentoring to giving, listen to this, even giving the young people their own gift Kroger cards. See, this is the part we don't get.
Wow.
Their own card. There are young men who were gifted Kroger cards. We forget that COVID-19 and injustice rebellions is that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, we talk about rioting in the streets. We talk about getting out and vote. Some of our young people don't eat regularly. We
Right.
all know when the school system closed that became
Talk about
apparent,
it.
not only for the children but for families as a whole. How do we
Absolutely.
make me? What are actionable steps involve everybody and not just come together, but stay together? Because as the Commissioner Hall described, our seniors, things that are coming up in the political arena, they just been exacerbated by way of George Floyd being
Yeah.
killed on TV and social media. You see,
Hmm.
COVID-19, we were a pressure cooker waiting to boil over and explode already.
Mm.
Yes, I
already.
agree.
I totally agree.
People have been indoors for the last close to 90 days already,
Yes.
right? People have been stressed out, scared, fearful already. Domestic violence has already went up, right?
Mm,
It was already prevalent, but at least the kids had an opportunity to leave home for school,
Yeah.
and some of the partners had an opportunity to leave home for work.
Yeah.
So some of these things have been exposed because of systemic racism and racial injustice.
mm,
Let's be clear,
Yeah.
right? So our seniors passing on from COVID-19, it's not COVID-19, it's systemic racism, right?
Mm.
From unjust healthcare disparities,
Yes.
right? It's being revealed in COVID-19, right? George
mm.
Floyd is being revealed, but I guarantee you, if you scour this country, you will get the names of ones who have been killed since George Floyd
Yeah.
that were not filmed
Yeah.
by police in this country,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
right? So this is what our young people, old people, middle-aged people, seniors are dealing with. We can sit here and talk about all this all day long. This is racial injustice. This is systemic racism
Yeah.
from its core.
Yeah.
From its core.
Mm. Wow.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I hear you. And I completely agree. And I feel like this time is different. You touched on a couple things, and one is really this condition we're in. It's almost the perfect storm, if you will, with having a captive audience with COVID-19 going on and most people at home and there's less distractions. We have a captive audience where people can't ignore and say that these things aren't happening. It's all over social media, as I was mentioning. It's all over the news. People, I think, can't ignore now and don't have an excuse to ignore what's happening. It feels a little different, although we talked about these things have been going on for decades, centuries even. It feels a little different now. Is there any advice you would offer in how we can maybe turn the dial a little more, do something differently this time so that we're not just protesting, we're not just feeling this rage and feeling this sense of powerlessness, but maybe what's something we can do a little differently than before so we can feel progress?
Yes, I think there's a number of determining factors. What comes to mind on a basic level is communing,
Yeah.
right? With sustainable, actionable goals with community organizations. And of course, that lines up with the local politics as well. We have to make sure that we are taking care of one another. Now, I'm specifically talking about the Black community. I am. I'm specifically talking about it. But I want to be clear that sanity, wellness, and health in this day and age is a form of rebellion in and of itself. To remain sane, to be healthy and well in today, with what you just said, is rebellion with all that we, because most of us are losing it. And if we were barely hanging on sanity wise and barely hanging on with our health and wellness, this is the tipping point. This is the tipping point. What are we can do? We can put in signposts to make sure that we are all sane.
Yes.
We can put in signposts politically, spiritually, mentally. The whole definition of wellness is actively pursuing states of being in good health. If we could just focus on basic terminology without matching wits, without criticizing on who's blacking out and what blacking out means, who should wear this t-shirt and what I can't breathe mean. We could cut out all that nonsense and go to a basic fundamental level of what it is, what does it mean to be well? What does it mean to be well? Socially, spiritually, environmentally, occupationally, intellectually, physically, financially, emotionally, and creatively. Put these things in place with our young people, our middle-aged people, all of our mobilizers, our organizers, put these in place. Our politicians, our civil servants, everyone, put these in place where we have systems in place that are ensuring wellness. not talking about it, being about it. And that could look a number of, doesn't have to be perfect. We just got to make sure we hitting our fronts. See, this is clear though. We point fingers on perfection. No perfection. We just got to make sure that we have pillars in place to address it, like legislation for cops who murder Black men on the streets in front of other human beings on film and look in the camera.
Uh, so having said that, would you be in favor of a police review board, like Commissioner Hall was talking about a database because George Floyd had 18 incidents.
Police officer.
The George Floyd, the police officer, had 18 incidents, and I'm sorry that that's just way too much for him to still be on it. That Minneapolis, the community of Minneapolis, the police force and its legislation, they failed the community by allowing that officer to still have his job after 18 complaints. So you and Commissioner, I think you hit on it and you started the conversation about it. But Commissioner Hall, is a database enough, or is an independent review board of police where the community is holding the police accountable? Is that going to be the wellness in practice that Dr. Kurt is speaking of as it pertains to us moving forward in lasting change?
I think that a citizens review board is good. I I actually feel like we already have something like that because in Atlanta we have the neighborhood planning unit. We have them all across the city of Atlanta in every single neighborhood. That's where the residents of particular neighborhoods come together. They have zoning review boards, they have citizen review boards, they have all types of boards that they break out into in their neighborhood planning unit. And also the city has all the committees where the public safety committee itself is like a citizen review board because it brings together specific council members and the residents to speak on public safety. But I think that we're missing the mark because there needs to be action,
Yes.
and the community needs to hold the electeds accountable for ensuring that there's action. I think everybody comes to the meetings, they say what they have to say. Some people put on shows, it doesn't mean anything. They convene the meeting and everybody goes home and nothing happens after that. There needs to be follow up. And I don't know exactly how that can be done. I think that the community need to literally have leaders that follow the actions of those committees all the way until fruition and until completion. And otherwise, we'll just keep going in the same cycle. Um, I have been really disheartened by the number of people who do not show up to board commissioners meetings. I've seen where they will pack at City Hall, but they do not come over to the Board of Commissioners. And a lot of times you have electeds that they will do things that they don't really know if their community of residents are for or against because they haven't heard from them and they're not out there in the community even talking to them. And so they may be passing legislation that impacts the people of the county in a negative way, but the constituents don't find out about it until they feel it. And so I think we need more leaders that are going to literally come out and voice their opinions and stay consistent and don't stop, don't give up. One of the things that I would like to see is more people lobby the state and ask the state to change the meeting days and times and the way we do meetings because I asked if we could continue to Zoom our meetings so that more people could participate, and I was told that the state sets our meetings for the Board of Commissioners. They set the time, the dates, they set whether or not we can Zoom or do them electronically. And the rule right now is that we cannot electronically or video conference our meetings unless it is a state of emergency. And
Wow.
that is the only reason why we have been able to do that now. And I was told that we cannot change our meeting times because it was set by the state. And I feel like you can't have a meeting at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning and expect for hardworking people to
Right.
come out during those
Right.
times. Our meetings need to be in the evening, and any elected official who doesn't want to come out and serve the people in the evening, they don't need to be elected
Yeah.
That's
because
right.
they're voted in to do what the people want them to do, to represent the people. And my constituents have been telling me that we need to meet in the evening after they get off of work, and
I
I
agree.
agree.
I agree with that as
So,
well. I agree with that as well. So if we heard you correctly, there are things in place that sort of act like a police review board, but as you see the problem, there's no leadership that follows through with the whatever the recommendations are. So it seems to me like it's an incomplete process if it's if what people are saying in the meetings that actually come to the commissioners meetings and city council meetings are not being heard. How can we as constituents of the community lobby for there to be action in some kind of way?
well, for me personally, my team and I, we try to track everything in writing. Even if we get a phone call from a constituent, we will follow up that phone call with an email, just reiterating what the conversation was. And then we connect in the responsible parties from the county level, whether it be the department head, the county manager, or a county executive. We connect them in to address whatever the issue is, and we follow that issue to resolution through that email. And that way we have something in writing that we can actually track since we don't have just a regular system.
Hmm.
So I think that in the meantime, our elected officials just need to find a reasonable way to keep track of things and to make sure that things are moving forward. And for me, that has been the easiest way, just right off the bat.
Yeah. Commissioner Hall, thank you for that. We read a part of former President Barack Obama's letter during this social unrest to the nation. I'm going to read a second part and just kind of get your thoughts. The second part, or an excerpt of this letter, says, "It is mayors and county executives that appoint most police chiefs and negotiate collective bargaining agreements with police unions. It's district attorneys and state's attorneys that decide whether or not to investigate and ultimately charge those involved in police misconduct. Those are all elected positions." And former President Barack Obama's positioning in this was earlier in the statement to say that yes, protest, but then vote. Why do you think it's so important for the community to show up, especially in local elections? And why have they been so historically just, pitifully supported, not very supported? Are people understanding the importance of local elections, do you think?
Really good.
Well, first, let me explain something about county and city. So, because it has become a very big issue for me, because I represent a district of over 170,000 residents, and my district is unique because it's entirely inside of the city of Atlanta. So I'm always getting pushback from other commissioners saying, oh no, we don't serve the city of Atlanta because they already have this or they have that already. So we don't need to add to it because we're municipalized. We don't have much unincorporated Fulton County anymore. These cities have decided to take on a lot of the services and programs themselves. So we don't have to spread our federal dollars around to them. And I hear that a lot because I have all of the city of Atlanta, whereas like my colleagues, for instance, Joe Carn or Marvin Arrington Jr., they have City of South Fulton, College Park, East Point, Union City, smaller cities like that that make up the body of the district that they represent. And so as far as it relates to police in Fulton County, we have been municipalized so much, and we have so many cities now that have taken on the responsibility of having police departments that we are down to 7 miles of unincorporated Fulton County that we are responsible to police, and that's all.
Hmm.
So, in my district in particular, the city of Atlanta is completely and totally responsible for police through their Atlanta Police Department.
Mm.
So I have no jurisdiction over what they do because the police department in Atlanta reports to the mayor. The mayor has total responsibility for Atlanta Police Department. I have no say so whatsoever. So you have to understand your government and who has the authority to do what in order to even challenge them,
Right.
in order to even have a conversation with them, to know that you're speaking to the right person. Because many times I go out into the community and people say, we're mad at you because you didn't repair Cascade Road. Why do we have all these potholes? And I'm like, I'm not that kind of commissioner. I'm not a commissioner of public works that goes out that's a department head and fixes the roads. I'm not a commissioner that's a department head of the city. I'm elected that, and I have over 75 neighborhoods in my district. I don't work for the mayor. I'm not appointed by the mayor. So our constituents need to become more informed so that they know how to approach every situation in each level of government.
Dr. Kurt, would you say that um, the constituents of this city um, are not concerned with what Commissioner Hall is talking about because of, how you brought into play with meaning and wellness? There's just fundamental things that are just not in place, and that's why we don't see the turnout that we need to see to, you know, help Hall do what she has been called to do.
So here's what shows up for me as you ask me that question, Taylor. I want to share just from my experience that rebellion is the open resistance to authority as a whole. Constituents are not concerned with who does what at this time, considering the pain and racial injustice that is happening all over. Oh, we have to understand this is happening in London, it's happening in Brazil, it's definitely happening in this country. So the notion of rebellion is open resistance towards authority as a whole. They're not at an emotional state to specify who does what and where to direct that attention to. I think the idea of being over politicized, contributes to that. I think that accountability is a close synonym to support, right? So when it comes to review boards, there needs to be specific, particularly with large cities, large police force. Accountability is support. It's not control, it's support. For example, Chauvin, if there was an accountability, then the support would have either been to remove him out of service and to support as a result of holding him accountable, the community could have been more supported as a result of an accountability piece,
Hmm.
right? So they go hand in hand. But rebellion in and of itself is against authority as a whole. Do we, as citizens, the average person, need to be educated on local politics? Of course. We don't know unincorporated, corporated. We don't know whose line is where, who reports to who. There should be some regular, and I'm certain that it is, some open forums and community conversations that educate them, right? There should be some key people, young people on up, who have been chosen to deliver that message from an educational standpoint. Here is the chain of commands. Here is how we align from a grassroots to getting to a commissioner hall or any other commissioner for these reasons, right? That has to be an educational piece. Otherwise, rebellion is open resistance to everybody who's in authority because it's against authority as a concept and not a commissioner or a mayor in particular.
So I guess my question then becomes, where do we begin, Commissioner Hall, to bridge
Mhm.
this gap? Because we're rebelling, yes. My answer to the rebel is to find a way to bridge the gap, because in 2015 and 2016, I was here in the same outrage as these kids are when the guy in Eric Gardner, I was
Mhm.
protesting in the streets. But here we are with George Floyd. I'm tired of protesting. I don't feel like protesting is doing anything. So I want people to know what to do to have lasting change. And it seems like we're just at a very ground level. We're not even close to being able to bridge these gaps so that, another Eric, not Eric Garner, but George Floyd doesn't happen 2 or 3 weeks from now, or 2 years later.
Well, I want to address a couple of things. Dr. Jasper really got my mind thinking. And Number one, I just want to say something about the protesters that they really need to understand. You do not want to commit any type of crime that will end up making you a felon, because then you have no right to vote. And like for instance, setting a car on fire will make you a felon. And so you don't want your rights to be taken away from you. So we need to be smart about how we protest. That's an example of why we have to really understand the right way to protest. I would say that we do need more mentors, and I myself experience the seeing how much we need them. I actually had a youth conference last year just strictly for males who were seniors in high school who attended Fulton County Public Schools and Atlanta Public Schools. And about over 300 young men showed up to my conference at the Loudermilk Center in downtown Atlanta. And I call that youth conference Empowering Young Men to Excel. And what I did is I selected a panel of men who were successful men in politics, business, film, entertainment industry, and other fields of study, STEM, STEAM. And this panel of men spoke to these young men, answered any questions that they had. They broke out into workshops and work sessions and talked to them about different how to be respectful to women, um, dressing for success, um, jobs in the entertainment industry versus uh, jobs in the music and entertainment industry versus being an elected official or an entrepreneur or a person in business. And when we finished our workshops and came back into the ballroom to convene and to just have the panel sit there and answer some final questions, what we found out from those young men who stood up to ask questions was, how do you deal with anger and hostility toward your father who you never knew, or toward the father that you know but has been absent in your life? We started to find out that a lot of these things are, they're deep rooted issues in our community that our young people are dealing with that have not been addressed. So then you add on top of that all of this other political unrest,
Yeah.
and this is what you end up with is a city torn apart, boarded up windows everywhere, um, cars set on fire, and an explosion of emotion that comes out in a violent way. So we have to do more to connect to the community. Over in Fulton County, we actually have a citizens university, and this is in place to allow our citizens to go through an 8-week program. They meet every single department head that works in the city, in the county, and they actually hear what happens and how we serve from every single level of government. They meet every single commissioner and executive so that now they can go back into their community and empower others within their neighborhoods. We have a youth commission. The youth commissioners are selected from every part of Fulton County. They actually come on, they go to the state with our external affairs department and our lobbyists. They learn how to lobby the state legislators, and they write bills for us that they recommend that we push through the state. And so that's another way that we try to create that connectivity with community and to actually educate people. I myself, I do a second conference also called CEOs of Tomorrow. It stands for Careers, Entrepreneurships, and Opportunities. And this is because, last year we had an issue with slider crimes. I don't know if many of you heard about that, but it was kind of like Southwest Atlanta and Buckhead had the most problems. And that's where you pull up to the gas pump, and while you're pumping gas,
They come
on
and
your
steal your
passenger
car.
side, a young person slides in and they either steal all your belongings out of the car or they just jump over in the driver's seat and
And
steal
take
your
your car.
car. Queen Latifah was here. She was actually taping that program called Star and stopped at the gas station on Cascade and they took her car. The same thing happened to my colleague's father, Judge Marvin Arrington Sr. His car was stolen like that as well. And so I started I started talking to the DA, Paul Howard, and our public defender, Vernon Jones, about what can we do. And I allocated $500,000 toward a program that we have in place now called Project Level Up Juvenile Recidivism. And so we are trying to take the youth and wrap services around them to keep them from becoming criminals. And they don't want to. These are youth who are foster kids, or they're kids whose parents are on drugs, or they're homeless and they don't know what to do. They have no one to turn to. We're trying to literally wrap services around them and their families more successful. So there are a lot of things that an elected official can do to try to help this situation from the ground up.
Mhm. That's powerful. There's a theme of this community that we are hearing in Dr. Jasper and Commissioner Hall in your conversations around working together. And a large part, I think, of this social unrest, of course, has to do with race. We can't deny it. It is something that we're seeing is being impacted. And as I scroll through social media today, I realized that there are more voices that we're seeing being added to this conversation, people that have maybe normally been silent, or um, brands and companies, large organizations that are speaking up and stating and standing in solidarity. You know, it can be frustrating sometimes to see what's going on and not see race and not be angry at those, white people that are doing this. Like if we're trying to transcend race, we have to be bigger than the color. But how do you do that if you're seeing these things happen and it is a racial issue, and you're still trying to build community? You're still trying, knowing that we have to work together. And I come from a place of love. Like I really believe that it takes, blacks, whites, it takes all of us. Like I don't want to separate people, but it is very difficult sometimes when it's a racial issue to do that. What is some advice, or how do we still continue to build community when race is at the forefront of the issues that we're dealing with?
Well, can I tell you just a quick story that happened to me just a few hours ago? I walked into Old Lady Gang, which is the singer and reality show star Candy Burris' restaurant, and there was a patron in there, and everybody was talking about the protest. And this one particular patron said she had a white friend, and she was talking to that white friend, and she said, "Do you not understand what we go through as Black Americans in America with police brutality?" And her white friend told her, "No, not until now." And she said, "How could you say that? How could you say not until now?" And she said, "Because before there were no videotapes, there were no audio tapes. It was just one person's word against the other." And I just thought it was absolutely outrageous that these things could be happening. So I just thought it was people trying to get out of trouble by making up these outlandish stories. She
Wow.
said, "But now we actually see what's going on." She said, "And I'm appalled because I'm like, this is for real. People are this man is standing on this man's neck. He knows he is blocking his air." She said, "We could see it in front of our faces now. There is no denial. We can't." She said, "It just seems so outrageous. And now it is even more outrageous to see it on film." So I was just floored because
Yeah.
I could not believe that someone would think for so many years that all of these stories were false and that they were just people trying to get out of trouble. And I'm so glad for the video. And I have to say, the young lady who was tasered, who was a student, she said on camera that if it had not been for the videotape, she consistently thinks about what would have happened to me.
Absolutely.
And so I
That's
say
great
that to
news.
say we have to
That's good.
continue when we see something wrong, we need to pick our phones up, we need to start videotaping, we need to be more aware of our surroundings, we need to say something when we see something.
Yeah.
Dr. Jasper?
Where do I begin? Yes, yes, and yes. In addition to saying something, we need to do something. We are filming our own demise. Let's be clear. I personally think that it is a rebellion for Black people to have to explain racism to white people to any degree,
Mm,
particularly now. I don't care what they say, they lack. See, when you lack acceptance, then you have to say that you don't understand and that you don't have the information. I was in college, 90s, at Iowa State University when the Rodney King riots took place. White students were rioting in Ames, Iowa at the time. I was in Ames, Iowa at Iowa State University from 89 to 94. When the Rodney King, now mind you, that was taped,
Yeah.
that was filmed. Rodney King, right? Rodney King, Ames, Iowa, at a major white university that at the time had close to 30,000 students,
Uh-huh.
white and other, and 1,000 students, both graduate and undergraduate blacks. And they were rioting, right? Not protesting, rioting. See, and we perpetuate that propaganda by using them as synonyms, right?
mm.
We have a fundamental constitutional right to express ourselves in the freedom of assembly, supposedly. So protesting is not a synonym for rioting.
That's right.
It's just not. So when we pass that on to our own youth in particular, yeah, there are instances, right? But we clear about white people, including law enforcement, who are perpetuating this rioting aspect within the protesting.
Yeah.
And so
Mm,
when we pass that propaganda on to our own youth, it's more of the disconnect. We say things like they're angry because they're not, yeah, they're angry when they see someone who looks like them being killed on film in real time. Yeah, that's anger. But they're not angry because dad is not at home. That's sadness. That's
mm.
disappointment. See, anger is a feeling of being unjust, unjustly treated.
That's true.
Yeah. So our babies without daddies are sad, disappointed. You follow me?
Hmm.
It then it takes something to take them to anger.
Yeah.
When you don't know your daddy, your heart is broken.
Mm,
It don't take anything to get you angry, but you are initially sad, hurt, and disappointed. So when you see a black man who could be your father get killed, that hurt and disappointment and sadness tips over to anger. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
Let's be clear about how the pathway of emotional dysregulation works with our young people in particular, right? So
right.
I wanted to make that clear that we have to be clear on how we get this message over. Are they protesting? Because John Lewis and MLK protested.
Yeah.
The Civil Rights Bill in '68 was as a result of protest,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Protesting in and of itself is just a statement of expressing disapproval for something.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean rioting.
Mm.
And we
That's
got to
right.
be clear on how we even convey the messages to each other when our babies and the youth are listening.
Very true.
Yes, I guess that will further establish, the community coming together to deal with the issue. I'm going to insert a few questions from the audience. The question for Commissioner Hall is: what is Fulton County doing to ensure fair voting in June and November, since a key protest is voting and social change?
Fulton County provides all of the locations for voting. We also ensure that everyone receives an absentee ballot, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. We have had over 130 something thousand absentee ballot requests. We have processed most of those. And I get on a Zoom almost every day with our neighborhood associations to inform them about the early voting locations that are open right now, and on election day, June 9th, we will have over 166 polling locations that will open. We did not expect that so many people would actually come out because of COVID-19, but people do want to actually physically vote. They're not trusting the absentee ballot. And I have to say that personally, I didn't either. I got mine, but I still went to the actual polling location because I wanted to literally punch those buttons and get that printout and see my vote. So we are trying to make sure that that process is a smooth process for everyone. We are even allowing that if a senior citizen comes to vote, that they can actually bring someone with them to help them with those new voting machines because they are no joke. They are like big tablets that you have to use a stylus for to touch the screen. You have to know how to follow through and click next. Senior actually asked me to try to help her because she was having a hard time with just following the screen and how to scroll up.
Yes.
It is really a different type of voting nowadays. It's not that punch, but you have to have some computer skills, and it's not something that seniors ever seen.
Mm.
So we're trying to make sure that that process is a lot smoother. Um, in addition to that, we have people on standby that are literally at the polling locations to assist people with the new machines because we know that it could be a difficult process. And as far as our polling locations, for me and my district, my constituents, they know they can call me and email me anytime. And if there are any problems, that they will be addressed. And I have to commend our director of registrations and elections because when there were problems at our early voting location in my district, which is CT Martin Recreation and Natatorium, um, I emailed Richard Barron, our Director of Registrations and Elections, and said the seniors are hot. They shouldn't have to wait. They're standing outside. They shouldn't even be standing, first of all, for
Mm.
hours. And the room is too small because it can't fit a lot of people. That man got on his people. He made them open up a bigger room. He added 20 more machines. He brought chairs out there and he had it set up so that seniors could go in first ahead of everyone else. So we just have to work together to ensure that everyone is going to task on ensuring that voting is done properly and legally and that no one is left out. And so I just try to stay on top of it as much as possible. And Fulton County is really trying to ensure that everyone is voting and there's no type of issues or problems with them voting.
So, do you trust the absentee ballot, or for you, your professional recommendation, if a senior can go and vote, to go and vote?
I say go vote.
Okay.
I say go vote. And then we added some drop boxes for absentee ballots for people who are okay with the absentee ballot process so that people can literally go and drop it in a drop box instead of mailing it and wondering if it got there on time and all that. So we have about 20 drop boxes across Fulton County. And people can find out those locations by going to our fultoncountyga.gov website and doing / absentee ballot drop box.
Okay, that's how you can find the Dropbox. Dr. Kurt, in your summation, how do we inspire our people to vote? I know it's a lot. I know you have broken it down, all the stages that our people are dealing with. But amidst all of that, um, how do we inspire them to vote? For me, it's not even a question. I am sad. My heart is broken. I feel emotionally all the political unrest, all the racial unrest, all the tension, but it is not going to stop me from getting to the polls. But for everybody else that isn't where I'm at or where my sister Myra is, what do you say to inspire folks to go and vote?
Well, of course, I'm a proponent for voting. Um, there's no question about it. But I'm also respectful for folks who have opinions that differ in terms of if voting going to make a difference or not. And I think that that is one of the main things. Really loving each other unconditionally. You know, we know what's critical. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't exclude the people whose perspective may differ. We as a community, we gotta learn this unconditional love, not in addition to self-love, this unconditional group love, loving ourselves through the fear and rage, right? Seek to understand it. as opposed to, as the young folks say, canceling somebody because they say that they don't want to vote, right?
Mm,
Still keeping that empathy and really digging deeper and not necessarily looking to change their mind or challenge them or be unproductive, but to actually see where they're coming from. We all can learn from each other's lived experiences.
Yes. Yes.
yes, that
I
is,
love that response, that
yeah.
empathy. And I think that's a huge part. I mean, that message, goes beyond even just this question. That is something that I think we are going to have to see and embrace as a nation. Empathy toward your situation right now might be different than mine, and I'm struggling in a way that you may not understand, and how empathy across the board is critical for people, for us to even start to get beyond this rage and this unrest that we feel.
It's interesting that you gave that perspective. Another question from the audience is, what can we really do to sustain the emotion and the anger to carry us into police reform? Dr. Jasper and Dr. Hall, I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that.
Sorry, I had to unmute. So, to sustain the unrest, um, from the county perspective, the only thing that I know is I've talked to our Department of Mental and Behavioral Health about the the way that we can address um, anger and other issues, and that is the only way that I know. As far as what I like to do is I just like to convene with people and talk directly to people. I have two adult sons. One is 28, one is 31, and I sit down, I talk to them and their friends. I like to get their input, and I have three millennials on my team. I believe that as an elected official, we need to have a team that kind of looks like and represents the district that we serve. So I like to hear from the millennials on my team. They're very active in the community. And so it gives me an understanding of what they're thinking and how they're feeling. I think that it's the only way that you can actually learn is to listen and hear what people are saying. So I guess that's the best way I could address that.
So to listen to the voices, and hopefully in listening to them, that will inspire some kind of lasting change that could lead to different reforms.
And then act on whatever you hear and whatever their needs are. Act on that and do what they need you to do. And for me, I don't stop at what I can do because I've made and build very good relationships across the board. Even with my reelection campaign, every single elected official that has a district inside of my district is endorsing me and supporting me because I work with every single one of them from the state level to the city of Atlanta, APS, Fulton County Schools, because I know that I cannot do it alone and neither can they. We have to work together to really get things done. And so that's a way that I try to make sure that following through on listening and hearing my constituents gets done all the way through the process.
Right.
That's right.
So I don't know, Dr. Jasper, did you also want to comment on that before we kind of bring some closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to share with the youth and young people, including the millennials, to reassure them that their pain is normal, natural, and appropriate, right? It's the expression of it that may come into question, but there is an educational piece. There's a supportive piece that I think all of us could benefit from, and that's realizing that our emotions are an expression of our humanity, and it is quite detrimental for us to go numb. And oftentimes we see that. We see powder kegs exploding because people have become numb. And when you numb one emotion, you have a tendency of numbing them all until something catastrophic kind of takes you over the edge. So the first and foremost thing is to let the young people know that their pain is natural and it's appropriate, and it must be guided appropriately. There is a space to express your pain and frustration. There's a way to listen to your pain and allow it to guide you, moving from destructive to self-soothing, moving from reactive or defensiveness to responding and offensiveness, moving from disallowing ambiguity to allowing ambiguity and discomfort, moving from counseling to real empathy, and eliminating contempt from other generations to say, oh, these young people are just acting out. This is real pain. This is real pain, and it is up to us, particularly mental health professionals and practitioners, is to provide space and education and ongoing support that there is a safe space. There is a huge benefit to being angry and painful and moving from destructive to reactive to responsive. And that is the criteria. And that's in a nutshell called emotional regulation. We have to encourage them to emotionally regulate because it is traumatic for all of us. It is traumatic, no question. And trauma is just when the experience supersedes our level of consciousness. And that's all of us, depending on what it is, right? And so we have to create space where young people have that opportunity to express themselves. As Commissioner Hall said, by even having a couple millennials on every team, in every office, on every organization, and creating ongoing spaces to listen to them. Not when this happens, not when the George Floyd, who's 46, 47, 48, 49, get killed, but when one of their partners get killed that we don't know about.
Right.
Right. And they have to show up to the job to do the intern or whatever it is, right? So those are just a few things that come to mind for me.
Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation, both Dr. Curtis Jasper, Commissioner Natalie Hall. Any just quick closing thoughts, parting words? Again, our topic is protest versus progress, and we've talked a lot about how protests are necessary, and we want to lead that to some progress and sustainable change. Any just final comments on or thoughts on where we are today and how do we get to that sustained progress?
Well, I was on a Zoom call earlier with business leaders from across Atlanta and Fulton County, and some of the state legislators, and one in particular who has marched with Congressman John Lewis and others across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and done a lot of the civil rights protests. He said, you know, this is a very difficult time in America because we can't really get out like we normally do, and we're really supposed to be sheltering in place, but we are having all of these Zooms. And he said, how do we connect more people together on the Zooms so that we can have a serious conversation about what's going on? And he said, kind of like a Zoom March on Washington, or a Zoom 100 Men March or 100 Women March, where we can literally come together and have a peaceful protest, but conversation on Zoom, and everybody be heard. And I think that unfortunately right now we do have a situation that we have to think of more creative and innovative ways to get together and speak with each other. Earlier today, a young lady walked up to me.
Empower somebody else. Continue with us next week. We're going to continue with protest versus progress. We're going to take it to an economic perspective. There is power in the African American dollar, and there are things that we can do there that can also help our cause of transformative and lasting change. Again, thank you, Dr. Jasper and Commissioner Hall, and we'll see you all next time. God bless you all.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you both.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
Bye-bye.